Hello BookTube, my name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. Sisters, sisters, there were never such devoted sisters, and I've got no rhythm. So a few things going on. I'm going to do a Monday Reads, but also let you know what's happening. So a lot of people trying to visit England put Israel in the green zone. That means people from England who visit Israel and then go back to England don't have to quarantine when they arrive in England. So Israel is one of the few places that people from England are allowed to go visit without additional restrictions. Israel, on the other hand, is not made itself so open, so that in order for my sister to visit and my wife's sister to visit, we had to jump through hoops, and they can only visit because they have blood relatives in Israel. We had to go to the Ministry of the Interior and get special permission. Usually, you don't need to apply for a specific one-time visa to come visit, but because of the Rona, things are a little different. So my in-laws jumped through hoops and brought my sister-in-law, who is here right now visiting, and we spent the weekend with her. I jumped through hoops, and my sister and her husband came to visit, so they're here also. And I've jumped through hoops again a week later in order to fill in the forms for my mother, who hopefully will fly back with me, when I come back from the UK. So a lot of complications, but all worthwhile. So we had a fabulous weekend. We spent the weekend further north than where we normally live with my in-laws, who live up the coast, and my sister-in-law, as I say, was visiting. So my wife and my sister-in-law are 18 months apart. They're very close, and haven't seen each other for a while. And in that time, my sister in London, who also hadn't seen her parents who live here, had been unwell and gone through a tough time. So it was great getting everyone back together again. Everyone was in fantastic form. We had a lovely Shabbat, as I say, by the seaside at my in-laws' apartment. Really, really lovely time. And then over the same weekend, my sister and her husband arrived on Saturday afternoon, so we went to see them after Shabbat, and they were staying quite close by, also up north in the same seaside town north of where we live, so hung out with them. My brother came up. My brother lives where I live, and me, my sister and my brother were all together for the first time in many, many months, and we had an absolute blast. Last night my sister came over to our apartment. She hadn't seen it since we did the renovations. Fun times all. So my sister is here on holiday. She'll still be here when I go to London to see our mum. And then we're having dinner together. I think Wednesday evening we're all having dinner in Tel Aviv. Next Wednesday, my sister and I and my mum will have dinner in London. My sister will be back and I'll still be there. Very complicated, but lots of fun. So good times. Family reunions are a good thing, highly recommended for everybody, and I hope and wish that many of you will have the opportunities to catch up if you haven't yet had that opportunity. This morning on my way into work, I listened to a great podcast. I think I've spoken about this podcast before. It's called You're Booked, hosted by Daisy Buchanan, the greatest literary name in all book podcasting. And each episode, she interviews usually a famous author and talks to them about books. And the reason I bring it up again is because the kinds of conversation, usually when it goes well, sometimes you have authors who are so on a different level that they just sound unlike anybody else, but occasionally you'll have an author who is also a reader, and when the two of them get together, and Daisy is also a published author, she's written a couple of works of biography, certainly one about being one of 6 sisters, and then she just had a novel out, none of which I've read, but she's clearly a reader as well, and when she gets an author on who is a reader, the kinds of conversation, the kind of talk is very similar to the kind of stuff that you hear on BookTube. So this one was a particularly great episode. She was interviewing an author called Esther Freud. Now, my relationship with Esther Freud goes back nearly 30 years. So I read her first 3 novels, and I wonder if any of you have this experience where you've read a work or two by an author and then kind of moved on and read other things. And I think the last book by Esther Freud I read must be at least 25 years ago, and she's gone on and published work since then, and she has a new book out this week, I think, called I Couldn't Love You More. But I haven't read her since at least 97, 98, something like that. So I read her first 3 books. The first book she published was a book called Hideous Kinky, which was subsequently made into a movie with Kate Winslet, but also going back 25 years at least, I think, since the movie came out. And I read that book because before we came to Israel, I think I bought it at the airport and took it on holiday. It was a slim Penguin volume, first-time author, sort of contemporary. It was actually set in I think the 60s, 70s, that novel, and published in the 90s. But it was a contemporary novelist, and very early on in my reading, one of the first, not one of the only, contemporary novelists that writing new books that I had read was a real introduction to my reading, and I read it, and my wife read it because I think we're on holidays, we both read it. So Esther Freud was in our brains at that time, and then when her second novel came out, it was called Peerless Flats, and it was set in a block of flats behind Old Street Tube Station in London, and I was working at the time right round there. I used to tube into Old Street, and my office was right on the corner of the Old Street roundabout. So I felt very connected to Esther Freud at the time, and that was the first two novels, both slim, sort of maybe 200, 220 pages, something like that, so very accessible. And as in my early reading career, this was a great way in. And then I kind of came to Israel, kind of forgot about it, and then her third novel I have actually in hardback, but I didn't buy it. Her third novel is called Gaglow, Gaglow. And the reason I have it and read it is because when we moved to Israel, my sister-in-law at the time, different sister-in-law, so my wife's sister is here visiting, my brother's wife, who also lives here, was working at the time in London and working for Penguin. It was a temp job or a fill-in, whatever. It was after college. I don't remember the exact circumstances. It wasn't a long-term career, but she was working Penguin, which was very exciting, working in books for me at least. And she used to describe that there was this cart full of books that would sit somewhere on the floor, and you could take what you wanted from it. So either they were new books or old books or I don't know what it was, but she used to every day she could come home with a couple of books, and they were free for anybody to take. If you work in publishing, there's loads of free books. But I'm a reader, so I have from those days, I have a collection of 3 Elmore Leonard novels. Elmore Leonard was published by Penguin for many years, may still be. A collection of 3 of his novels in one bind up, which took me many years to get to. It was sitting on the shelf as a freebie from my sister-in-law. And Gaglow by Esther Freud was in hardback, and as we read the first 2, I was quite excited to read that. So that was what I say. My brother's wife, Britt, brought those home, and I remember reading Gaglow then. So I recommend. I'll put a link to Esther Freud's interview with Daisy Buchanan on your book. It's a terrific interview. Esther Freud, I think, is 3 or 4 years older than me, but many of the touchstones and books that they talk about Jean Rhys, and they talk about Laura Ingalls Wilder, who I never read, but is a recurring theme. I think I hear people here on BookTube talking about the impact that she had on their lives as young readers, and she comes up, and then a whole bunch of other points. Nicole Krauss she talks about, and there were a lot of things that resonated. That was a great podcast. I will leave a link to it below. Let's talk about the books I read. Finished last week. I finished Gingerbread by Helen Oyeyemi. It's lovely. I don't know if you can see the lovely sort of gold embossed cover. This was a really nice one. This is one of these giant airport paperbacks. This is the 4th Helen Oyeyemi I read. I read Boy Snowbird. I read Mr. Fox was the recent one, and then there's a set of short stories which I don't remember. There's one a complicated many word title. What is not yours, or what I don't know, whatever it was. And this is my 4th. This is a novel, Gingerbread. Didn't love it. The Helen Oyeyemi is firmly in the Angela Carter tradition of using fairy tales and the stories that we learn in our youngest years to illustrate things about our lives now. Carter did it from a very dark perspective, and because many of those stories have deeply dark elements. If you've ever read or seen The Company of Wolves, and which is a short story from one of her collections, which is highly recommended. And the film was one of those early film 4 productions in the 80s. I think Neil Jordan directed. It was a terrifying movie with one of the great werewolf transformations. Anyway, Helen Oyeyemi is the 4th book, and she's gentler than Carter, but playing just as much in that tradition. And Gingerbread, of course, is a feature of many fairy tales and houses made of gingerbread and sweet treats used to tempt children. So that's the Gingerbread of the title. This was just tipped over into the land of twee for me and didn't really work. Maybe I was tired reading it and it was a bit bitty and never really cohered and didn't have the flow and the and I think the last book of hers that I read, Mr. Fox, was very much sort of interconnected short stories and was constructed to stop, start, and yet because of the way it was structured, it did have a flow and did have a real through line. And this I struggled with. There are some distinct parts. I don't think it has the weight to carry off some of the challenges it places before the reader, and so it wasn't super successful for me. I think I probably will read more Oyeyemi because there's real talent there and real joy to be had. But Gingerbread didn't work great for me. After that, I read All-Star. This is very glossy. All-Star Batman. This is written by Scott Snyder, who wrote the ongoing Batman series that I'm still working through from sort of mid 20-teens. This is so after we finished that, this was something else, All-Star Batman. I can't quite work out if this is supposed to be out of continuity. I'm not quite. I think the All-Star was an attempt at doing something out of continuity. There was All-Star Batman and Robin, which was a Frank Miller thing, and this is All-Star Batman, which is another relaunch and another new series. And this is a hardback book that contains issues 1 through 5. I don't even know if the series is ongoing. This has art by John Romita Jr. John Romita Sr. is a famous Marvel artist who did a lot of work on Spider-Man back in the day, and John Romita Jr. is his signature, which you can just about see there. JR. That's his famous signature, John Romita Jr. I'm just not an enormous fan of his art. I think he's done a lot of work on the Punisher, and his face is always quite square. Like you can see on the back there, you have Batman and Harvey Dent, Two-Face. I don't know. I mean, it's just not my favourite kind of art. Okay, there's a big Batman, and he's transporting. The whole point of this story is Batman has to get Two-Face to a particular place in order for some cure. I don't know what it was. There's Jim Gordon with a full beard there, and that's Harvey Bullock. Everything's just a little bit square-faced and not my ideal artwork. That isn't normally a problem. I read comic books and graphic novels mostly for the story, not the art, and that's, I think, makes me unusual. A lot of people collect particular artists, and there are some artists that I'm drawn to, but really I collect by comic book writer rather than artist. This was a funny old story, I say, all about Two-Face, which is, we're in the moon is in Gemini or whatever it is right now, so 20th of May to 20th of June, so all things have a duality to them, and this is playing into the Two-Face mythos, and then we invent some stuff about Batman. There's a new sidekick for Batman who isn't a Robin. Batman says, I'm trying something, so should we call him Robin? No, I'm trying something different, says Batman. There's a bit of Alfred in here, and lots of Batman enemies show up. So we've got KG Beast, and we've got Killer Croc, and we've got Oswald Cobblepot as the Penguin, and Black Mask is in here. So there's a lot of Batman stuff, but it again, fairly weightless and didn't really land with me, and I wouldn't pursue this further, but I must have picked this up. This is cover price of $24.99, but this I think would have been one of the great eBay purchases of August 2020 when I got over to London last summer, and would have picked this up. And next book is by an author who we've already mentioned, a person who I've known since she was about 14, 15 years old. I was her camp counsellor at one point. She was a very good friend of my wife's brother. It was before my wife was my wife, when we were dating many years ago. So at least one occasion where the four of us went out, spent the afternoon in Hampstead window shopping and buying jeans or something. And later on she married my brother. And my sister-in-law, Britt, has put out her first book. It's called More to Life by Britt Sevitt. Britt, and there's a picture of my beautiful sister-in-law, Britt. It's a book about her journey, a journey from depression and having a tough time of life, and talks about her spiritual awakening and her coming off medication and moving to a freer and healthier and happier life. Britt, I don't think, knows that I've read this. I think she made every effort and mentioned to my wife even that she would really rather I didn't read it. I wasn't involved in the proofing of this, as many lots of other people that I know have asked me to read things pre-publication, and Britt very, very definitely didn't. And she doesn't know. I read this over the weekend. It came out about 3 or 4 months ago. I ordered a copy from the UK, took ages to arrive. I cancelled that order, got another order, and finally arrived. I say Britt kind of made it clear that she wasn't super keen on me reading this, because she knows I'm a cynical arsehole. And I think this is a very wide-eyed look at her life. And I think she was very worried about how I would respond and how I would pass on that criticism or response to her. And that's we'll deal with that in our relationship. And I love her just as much, and I love my brother, and there's no family problems there. But her desire to avoid placing this in my hand may not. It didn't come from nowhere. Let's put it that way. I am a cynical arsehole, and I am not always the most pleasant human being. But I did want to read it, and I have read it, and it's tremendously brave and vulnerable. And Britt talks about things in her life which we didn't know about, and I live around the corner to my brother, and I love them, and we spend a lot of time with Britt and my brother and her amazing kids. And it was very hard for me to read about some of the things that she's gone through that we were oblivious to and insensitive to. So that was hard for me, and I think the lesson that I take from that is one of how we must expand our empathy and love and be mindful and thoughtful of those close to us, who just because they are close to us geographically as well as emotionally, there still may be parts of their lives that are hidden from us. And not that we need to pry into those things, but we need to be sensitive that people experience life in different ways at different levels, and we must show endless kindness when we can. And the book goes on to talk about her spiritual awakening. There's a lot of the divine in here, and the acceptance of the divine in all things. She talks about her upbringing as a sort of modern Orthodox Jew, and her relationship with her family, and how maybe that sent down one path which was sort of rooted in her own experience as a Jew, but also she has a degree in psychology. She says undergraduate degree in psychology and philosophy, and then she did her master's in Cambridge. This is an educated, very smart, very capable young woman who was very focused on science and her own experiences of life, and opening herself up to what I think she refers to as sort of alternative medicines, and I think a better term, when the time comes, I'll have this discussion with her, would be complementary medicines. But for her, this is very much an alternative to the treatments that she'd received up till now. I think she has clearly gone through something tremendous, and she talks about has changed her life. and then the impact of that, becoming vegetarian and entire political views have changed, and just being more open to the world. I think it's a really amazing story, personal to me because we know Britt. Some things she talks about are far from my experience. I feel my life is probably less spiritual, and I've moved away from the divine, while she has got close to it, and I envy her that. She talks, at least in one place, about the connection between our world and the spiritual world. She talks about sensing messages from her father-in-law in the days after he passed away, which is of course my father. So I don't get messages from my father, and I'm very pleased she does. I didn't mind that at all. Even if it's not my world and my experience, it doesn't have to be. And I very much enjoyed reading that this was her experience of a man that we all loved. So this was really kind of marvelous. I think it's very personal, and that I have a personal connection to Britt. But that said, I think there are some universal aspects here. I think Britt, in telling her story, has included pointers and paths that other people may relate to and understand and take comfort from and be inspired by, and that's More to Life by my brother's wife, Britt Sevitt. And none of them know that I have a YouTube channel, so they'll never see this, and that's probably good. Anyway, I like that. And then the book I'm currently reading, which is the book I will take with me on the plane to London and probably finish on the plane, so that I can then read all the books that I have waiting for me there, is The Bottoms by Joe R. Lansdale. This is a standalone, so I've read a fair bunch of Lansdale's Hap and Leonard series, which are very funny, very gritty, very violent, and comically violent, but funny and well written. And this is a standalone. I read one other Lansdale standalone called Leather Maidens, maybe, which sort of washed over me and didn't really do anything for me. But I had this is the last, for now, book from my age-old TBR that I'm going to read, and it's going to be all sort of fresh stuff coming in from Thursday. But I'm 40 pages in, and so far really enjoying this. I bought this in exactly 3 years ago, almost exactly 3 years ago. 4 years ago, May 2017. I bought this in Hay-on-Wye. Those of you who know the UK, Hay-on-Wye is like an entire book village where all the shops in this old Welsh village, all of them, so about 17, 18 of them have been turned into bookshops. Some of them specialised, some of them just general bookshops, second-hand bookshops of various different sizes and styles. And this is from the, you'll be able to see that in 1 second, the Hay Cinema bookshop. I paid £3 for this. I went on a trip to the UK, obviously 4 years ago. I was over, I think a friend was making a bar mitzvah for his son, one of my oldest friends, and I went over for the weekend on my own and stayed an extra couple of days and drove to Hay-on-Wye with my mum and back for the festival. Hay-on-Wye has a literary festival that runs about a week, and we went up and spent a day, and I saw Neil Gaiman in conversation. I saw Stephen Fry, Jonathan Safran Foer, and spent the day, and this was one of the books that I bought in a bookshop while I was there. So happy to read this. 40 pages in. I say this is set in the 30s in somewhere in America, in the South, in the woods, in East Texas. There you go. And it's dark. I don't think this is going to be sort of laugh out loud hilarious. But the thing that I noticed just in the opening is what a tremendous writer Lansdale is. So I think of him as being sort of gritty and nasty and noirish and dark-hearted. Fine nature writing and just a really sort of beautiful way with describing what the life is like for these young children living on loads of land in East Texas. Their father's the town barber and constable, and in one of the opening scenes, their dog is injured when they're out, and they have to put the dog down, and I won't spoil it more than that, whether they do or whether they don't, and what they do. But a 9-year-old boy knows how to load and carry a shotgun, and he understands his responsibility, and we learn, even in the first 10 pages, during which I wept like a child, about man's relationship to nature and man's responsibility for those around him. And so far, really good. And there's a mystery, and there's a body has been discovered and horribly mutilated. So there's going to be some dark and nastiness and serial killing and all sorts of things going on. But beautiful writing. I really recommend Lansdale. Happy Ended is a great place to start, but this is actually, I think I'm going to really enjoy reading this on the plane. And that's all. And next time I publish, I may well be in my mum's flat in London, hopefully. Take care, hope you're having a good week. Bye.